This happened when I was 13 years old, and it's part of the reason that I'm still scared of the dark. It's also the reason that I won't go into a cellar, a crawl space, a basement, or any kind of space that's dark and damp. Before I get to my experience, some backstory is in order. Our mom remarried to a man, let's call him Dave, and they decided to move my brother and I to a different state away from our family. Before they got married, Dave attacked our father with a knife, and our father shot him. The gun had buckshots in it, so it was more of a scatter gun than regular bullets, thank God. Anyway, they found this 2-story house in Virginia, close to State Park. They told us they got an amazing deal on it because it was situated in the backwoods, away from everything and everybody. At the time, my brother Eric and I hadn't seen it yet because we were living with our grandmother and going to school until they could get everything moved in. I didn't want to go because I didn't like the man that our mother had married, but being a kid, she wasn't about to listen to me. The day came when we had to go, and I absolutely threw a fit because, like I said, I didn't like this man. We traveled 3 hours to our new home, and when we got there, my brother and I finally saw this amazing house. It was 2 stories, the basement being the bottom floor, and the house on top. When our mother said it was away from everything and everybody, we had no idea that she meant it was so remote that we would be living out in the boondocks. This house was 5 miles away from the main road, and it was surrounded by dense forest. The house layout went like this, and it's important to remember. The basement was the whole bottom floor, and it was huge. It had one entrance with little windows all the way around it. You had to go up these huge wooden steps to a wraparound porch. Straight in front of you, going up the steps, were 2 huge white French doors. That was the main entrance. If you went in the front door, you would be in the dining room. Now you could either go straight into the kitchen, or you could go down a step to the hallway, which leads to the only bathroom, the basement door, and the back door. Or you could go right into the living room. My mom and Dave's room was off to that side. You could go through an archway to my room, which was on the left, and Eric's room was on the right. This house also had a wraparound porch. All of our windows were at least eye level when standing anywhere on it. My brother and I had rooms towards the back of the house, and when you looked out our windows, you could see nothing but forest. My first experience living there happened around a month after we moved in. Everyone was in bed, but I was up playing video games and listening to music. I had heavy blinds over my window. Sometime after 1 a.m., I started to get sleepy, so I turned everything off and laid down in my bed. It was quiet, except for some crickets chirping. I was dozing off when I heard something. I opened my eyes, thinking maybe I had dreamed it. Then I heard it again. It was 3 thuds. It sounded like boots on the back porch, walking back and forth. I couldn't believe it. My heart was beating like a drum. I was terrified. I couldn't move. I was so scared. Then the foot thuds stopped. They stopped right in front of my window. A minute passed. Then I heard something or someone whisper, "Christina." It sounded like a man, but it also didn't. It's hard to explain. It sounded unnatural, like a growl. At this point, I was shaking and had thrown my covers to the side. I had my door open, and I could see Eric asleep in his bed. Then whatever it was started tapping on my window, and I ran to my mom and Dave's room. I banged on the door and screamed for them to get up. My mom and Dave came out of their room with sleep-filled eyes, asking me what was wrong. I still have no idea what I said, but I know it was something to the effect of somebody's trying to get into my window. Dave grabbed his flashlight and went to the back door. I stayed with my mom. He was gone for a while. When he came back, he said there wasn't anyone or anything that he could see outside, and he didn't see any prints anywhere. I was beyond freaked out and didn't sleep that night. The next thing that happened didn't happen to me, but it happened to my brother. He was 7 at the time, and my mom was making him sleep alone in his room at night. I would always leave my door open to make him feel a little better. One night we all went to bed as usual. He said he was laying in bed, nearly asleep, when he heard something at his window. This was around August, and it was hot. The house had no air conditioning, so his window had a screen over it that he would raise slightly to let some air flow in. He heard something at his window, and he raised up to see what it was. He thought it may have been an animal. When he looked, he saw a man's face, but with yellow glowing eyes. He screamed bloody murder and ran from the room again, banging on our mom and Dave's room. Dave grabbed his light and again went in search for whatever or whoever was at the window. He came back like last time with nothing. Again, that night my brother refused to sleep in that room, and he started sleeping with me. A month or two went by, and one day, Eric and I came home to an empty house. Our mom and Dave had gone somewhere, and would be back a lot later than they thought. I used my key and let us in. My brother went into the living room and planted himself in front of the TV. I took my stuff to my room and noticed Mom hadn't gotten my laundry done. I decided to do it myself to help her out. I got my brother's laundry and headed to the basement. When you opened the basement door, you had to switch the light on to go down. The steps were wooden, and there were no rails. When I opened the door, I switched on the light, but nothing happened. I could see a little because of the sunlight coming through the windows. I made my way down the steps carefully, and switched on the lights at the bottom of the stairs. To my relief, it worked, and showered the basement in light. I made my way over to the washer and dryer, and got started on the heap of laundry that I had in my hands. I was working, not paying attention, when the smell hit me. It smelled like rotting meat and smoke. It turned my stomach. I started looking for the source of the smell, and when I looked far back to the corner, I saw something. I thought it may be an animal that fell down the old coal chute that ran into the house. Dave hadn't blocked it off yet. I went closer. That was a huge mistake. I saw a child reaching out his arms. I was so shocked that I fell back. This child started to crawl towards me and grabbed my pant leg. I kicked and screamed, then closed my eyes thinking this is it. This is how I'm gonna die. Then my brother called out from the stairs. "Hey Chris, you okay?" I opened my eyes, and there was nothing there except a small handprint on the bottom of my jeans. I didn't think twice. I ran up the stairs, dragging my brother with me. I slammed and locked the basement door when I got to the top. When our mom and Dave got home, I told them what happened, but they didn't believe me. They thought both my brother and I were making things up. They thought we were acting out because we didn't want to move there in the first place. I couldn't believe it. Our own mother didn't believe us. I was shocked and upset. After that, I refused to go into the basement or let Eric go down there. Then one day, we came home from school, and our mother told us that she had something happen to her. She was cleaning as usual, and she heard a child laugh. She thought it was us, and got upset because she thought we had skipped school. She came out of her bedroom into the kitchen, and saw a little girl in a blue dress standing there, holding a teddy bear. She was shocked. Then the little girl raised her arm, pointed her finger to her, and said, "He's coming for you." Then she disappeared. My mom was so scared that she ran from the house to the barn and stayed there until Dave got home. She apologized to us, saying she was sorry for not believing us to begin with. Not long after that, Mom and Dave divorced, and we left the house for good. Dave tried many times to sell the place, but he couldn't because of its history. Apparently, a family living in the house sometime in the late 70s had some trouble, and the father went crazy. He shot the mother and one of his 2 daughters. The other one went into the basement to hide from him when he set the kitchen on fire. The little girl tried to get out of the basement, but the doors were locked. Before she could break a window, the smoke got her, and she passed out. She died in the fire. Dave lived in the house until he died a few years later, and passed the house down to his son. Since they couldn't sell it, it still remains in the family. I know I'll never be back to that place ever again, and if some naive person does happen to buy it, I only hope they don't go through what we did. I live in a small town in Alberta, Canada. This happened last summer when I went on a day hike by myself. I decided to explore a trail that had been recommended to me by my friends. Little did I know that this hike would end up the way it did. I parked my car at the front of the trail. It was just a day hike, nothing overnight, so all I had was a small backpack that was mostly filled with water. I also had a lunch and a raincoat, just in case. I figured if anything else went wrong, then I could get back to my car within a few hours. The trail seemed less traveled. It was surrounded by tall trees and thick underbrush. It was the perfect setting for a day hike. I laced up my boots, adjusted my backpack, and set off on the path. It was not the most remote trail I had ever done, but once I got in there, it felt like I was miles away from civilization. The noise from the road was basically gone after 10 minutes of walking. The air was fresh and crisp as I ventured deeper into the wilderness. After hiking for a while, I noticed something out of the ordinary. It was in the middle of the trail, and it looked like some kind of a rock, but something looked different about it. I stood over it for a few seconds, not knowing what it was. I bent over and picked it up, because I was curious. As soon as I lifted it up, I could tell it was not a rock, because it was too light. As I examined it, I soon realized that I was holding a piece of a skull, and I was pretty sure it was from a human. I knew what deer and bear skulls looked like, and this wasn't one of them. I quickly put it down, not wanting to disturb the scene any more than I already had. I turned around and started walking back quickly. My hike was over. I had to report what I found. As soon as I reached my car, I pulled out my phone to check if I had service. I did. I called the police and told them everything. I waited there in my car until they arrived. When they did, I showed them where to find it. As it turned out, the piece was indeed human. It belonged to a hiker who went missing the year before. The hiker was already confirmed dead, because other bone fragments had been found already. They were scattered about the area by animals, so it's unlikely that the entirety of the remains will ever be recovered. This discovery was a dark reminder of what can happen out there in the wilderness. Nobody knows what the cause of death was for this individual, but foul play was never suspected. My husband George and I were fortunate enough to own a charming cottage on the shores of a secluded lake. We had bought it only a few months before this happened, and it was our second visit to the place. It was surrounded by trees, and there was a long dirt road leading up to it. There were no neighbors for miles, and the lake was pretty close to private, even though it was technically public land. We didn't own it. The cottage itself was a quaint structure, with weathered wooden walls that exuded rustic charm. Inside, it was still sparsely furnished, with just a single sofa in the living room area. The kitchen had an old refrigerator that was propane-powered. We tried not to use it too much. The oven and stove was also propane. There were solar panels on the roof, but other than that, there was no electricity. There were large windows at the back that offered wonderful views of the scenery, including the lake. We cherished our solitude out there. I had retired that year, and George was still working part-time. We were planning to spend a lot of time out there, and we loved every minute so far. However, one day, as we enjoyed a morning coffee on the porch, George's eyes caught the sight of an unfamiliar figure in a small boat drifting along in the water. It was a perplexing sight, because we had never encountered any other boaters on the lake before, Like I said, it was a secluded spot. The lake didn't connect to any other main bodies of water. We were really not expecting to see anybody. We waved at the man, trying to be friendly. He was about 200 feet away. To our surprise, he remained still and unresponsive. He was looking straight ahead in our direction. We thought that was rude, but we continued with our day. The following day, we went about our routine, but we noticed the mysterious man was there again. He sat in that same small boat, motionless, positioned just off the shore, his gaze still fixed upon our cottage. His presence unnerved us, but we tried to dismiss it, believing we could be overreacting. It was hard to make sense of it, though. He didn't seem to be fishing or anything. We were really confused about why he was there. We also wondered where he was going at night. We had introduced ourselves to all the others in the area, and we were pretty sure he didn't have a place nearby. As twilight fell, George and I found ourselves drawn to the window, compelled to watch the man. It was almost completely dark, but the man was still there, just sitting in that small boat. By this point, George and I were seriously worried. We began to suspect that he was sitting there all night. We waited until around midnight. By then it was pitch dark outside. We couldn't shake the idea that the man was still out there watching our cottage. I was more scared than George was, but we both agreed that we had to check. Armed only with a flashlight, George ventured out into the night, his footsteps echoing softly on the wooden dock. I stayed back at first, watching from a distance. As the beam flashed across the water's surface, it fell upon the man. His face lit up in an eerie way. The intensity of his gaze was truly troubling. I grabbed George's arm when I saw that. Without saying a word, we retreated back to the cottage. We knew at that moment that it was time to leave. We stayed up that night, but we hardly slept. The following morning, we packed up, and we were eager to escape. The man in the boat was still there. When we got back to the city, we had a long talk about what to do. We called the police, but there wasn't really anything they could do, since it wasn't illegal to be there. We thought it could count as some kind of stalking or harassment, but that would be hard to prove. In the end, we continued going to our cottage, but we bought a gun for protection. It was a smart thing to have anyway, since there were bears in the area as well. This happened over 2 years ago now, and we haven't seen the man again, even though we spend almost half the year out there. We asked all the neighbors about the man, but nobody knew who he was, and none of them had experienced anything like that. We still don't know what it was all about, or what that guy wanted. I was around 6 or 7 years old. We had made what at the time was a regular trip to visit my uncle on his farm. I was especially delighted because my favorite cousin Jess was going to be there too. She was 6 months older than me, and anytime we were together, we were partners in crime. We were all pretty familiar with my uncle's land and most of the woods and other surrounding areas. We were always taking long walks or going on my uncle's four-wheeler and exploring. Most of these trips were uneventful. That was until this day in June in the early 90s. I only remember it was June because it was summer, but we had not had our big 4th of July party yet. Jess and I set off walking down the dirt road that ran from my uncle's place. Just a little ways down was a small creek. If there was a lot of rain, then it would flood and wash out the bridge, but this day, the creek was bone dry. We loved it when it was dry, because that meant we could hunt for interesting rocks and arrowheads. We even found a half-finished hatchet head once. So there we were, walking along this familiar creek bed, chatting about a lot of nothing, when I spotted something on the bank, almost parallel with us, and it was massive. I froze and grabbed Jess's hand, then I pointed with the other one, and I realized what we were looking at. We had a full broadside view of a large black bear. Jess clapped her hand over her mouth to stifle herself from screaming, and I bolted. holding my cousin's hand in a death grip as I dragged her away. At that moment, getting her out of there safely was the only thought I had. I ran as hard and fast as I ever have. Once we were out of the creek and on the road, we stopped and doubled over panting. We made eye contact and both burst out laughing. I think we laughed because if we hadn't, we would have cried. I broke the tension though, and we made it back home. We told our parents, but they didn't believe we saw a bear. We may have been kids, but we got a good enough look at it, and there was no mistaking what we saw.